Hey guys, tonight we wander into the hush of early Canadian wilderness, trailing behind fur traders who understood silence the way a musician understands breath. You picture the spruce-lined corridor tightening around you, snow swallowing your boots with the softest sighs, and the cold nibbling at your eyelashes until each blink feels like a tiny spark in the dark. It's peaceful, sure, but you probably won't survive this if you decide to reenact it without at least one good pair of wool socks and some serious respect for the temperature. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me your location and your local time, because it's fun seeing who else is wandering through the night with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward behind a pair of traders who don't bother with introductions. They just expect you to keep up and to keep quiet. And honestly, those two things already feel like a full-time job. One of them gestures with his chin, the universal sign for "follow me, rookie," and you step exactly where he steps. The snow there is already compressed into something like a silent landing pad. He's not being polite by giving you the easy spots. He's making sure you don't ruin the trail's hush. For traders working deep in contested territories, quiet isn't politeness. It's currency, it's safety, it's longevity. They learned quickly that loud footsteps attracted more than just curious wildlife. And that's your first lesson. You don't make your own path unless you have to. You borrow theirs. Snow and moss, two materials that dominate this landscape in different seasons, absorb sound beautifully, but only when treated right. Press too lightly, and the snow squeaks with that high-pitched complaint you didn't know frozen water could make. Press too hard, and it crunches like broken porcelain. The perfect footstep is a shift of weight, a slide, a slow sink. It's practically choreography, and you're performing barefoot in a ballet you didn't audition for. The traders, of course, make it look easy. One of them, a Métis guide moving with a rhythm that borders on poetry, occasionally throws you a glance that says, "Relax." The land listens back. And in that moment, you actually believe him. There's a mainstream historical fact tucked into his presence, too. Many fur expeditions relied heavily, almost entirely, on indigenous guides to choose routes, manage hazards, and maintain an acoustic profile that kept the party safe and the hunt efficient. Without them, the fur trade simply wouldn't have expanded as it did. Branches creak overhead, moved by a wind you can't feel under your fur hood. The sound is so subtle that you almost mistake it for your imagination. And that's exactly the point. The quieter the land becomes, the more you hear its background heartbeat. A squirrel coughs. Yes, they cough. And yes, it's somehow both cute and judgmental. And you jump hard enough to startle a clump of snow off a low branch. It falls with an embarrassing thwump. The trader in front of you pauses, raises an eyebrow, and then whispers, "Congratulations, you've invented the world's least effective alarm system." That's your first joke quota satisfied, and you're not even halfway warmed up. Your second lesson arrives when you cross into a patch of mossy ground. In the early autumn months, before snow dominates the scenery, traders treasure this stuff like natural carpeting. You try a step, and immediately feel swallowed. The moss cushions your boot so thoroughly that you could drop a bowling ball onto it and it would just sigh into the greenery. Here, quiet travel isn't just possible, it's effortless. But there's a quirky tidbit many people don't know. Some traders actually carried small bundles of dried moss in their packs, not just for fire starting, but to place strategically under tent poles or over loose rocks to deaden nighttime noise. Moss was their wilderness soundproofing, centuries before foam panels lined recording studios. Sometimes, when camp chatter threatened to get too rowdy, one trader would dramatically toss a handful of moss into the center like he was sprinkling holy silence, which usually earned a round of sleepy laughs. You keep walking, careful and deliberate. After a while, you notice the traders aren't just choosing quiet paths, they're scouting them. Every few hundred paces, they stop, tilt their heads, and listen. What you hear is wind and the faint buzzing in your ears from trying too hard, but they're detecting tiny acoustic signatures, the brittle snap of a buried twig, the hollow echo beneath a patch of snow that might conceal ice, or the rattling chatter of a frozen creek that could betray them when crossed. One of the traders kneels and digs his mittened fingers into a drift, testing its density. After a moment, he nods approvingly and marks the spot with a little cross of sticks. You ask, "What's that for?" And he whispers, "For our return. Snow changes its mind overnight." And he's right. Historians still argue whether these traders developed systematic acoustic mapping techniques intentionally or if it emerged through trial and error passed down informally. Either way, the result was the same, an intuitive, evolving map of how the landscape sounded, not just how it looked. As the afternoon light fades, the hush deepens. Everything gets softer. Your breath, your footfalls, even your thoughts seem to muffle themselves. Silence this thick feels less like absence and more like presence, and that realization gives you a little shiver. You joke to yourself that it's the kind of quiet where your stomach growling could start an international incident. That's joke number 2 for the eagle-eyed scorekeepers. The traders lead you onto a ridge where the snow is packed so firmly by wind that it behaves like memory foam. The sky is a slate-gray lid overhead, but the brightness of the snow fills the world with a strange, glowing calm. Up here, they explain, travelers can hear threats from far away. Wolves, rival hunting parties, or even the distant crash of shifting ice. In the fur trade era, information traveled through sound faster than any human messenger. A single snapped twig could warn or betray. A single cough could signal exhaustion, illness, or approach. And yet, paradoxically, you find yourself wanting to breathe louder, just to break the tension. It's the same instinct that urges people to whisper in libraries or giggle during silent car rides. One of the traders senses this urge radiating off you like steam and says, barely audible, "Don't worry, the quiet gets friendlier the longer you walk inside it." That line lands with surprising comfort. You're starting to understand that this scouting process isn't just for safety, but for the soul. Because in choosing the quietest trails, traders choose the routes of least resistance, least disturbance, least conflict. Silence isn't only a survival mechanism, it's a philosophy, one shaped like countless nights when the world felt too big and the fire felt too small. A rabbit darts across your path, leaving teeny dimples in the snow. You watch it bounce away like a fluffy punctuation mark. The trader ahead chuckles softly. At least someone's confident out here. That's your third mile joke. Quota met. As you keep moving, your senses shift. You stop watching with your eyes, and instead watch with your ears. The swish of your coat, the mudded thud of your boots, the distant drip of melting icicles, everything becomes information. And slowly, tentatively, you stop being the noisy outsider and start becoming part of the landscape. A temporary ghost drifting through spruce shadows. You've covered barely a mile, but you feel as though you've slipped into a different gear of existence. The traders keep their pace steady, patient, understanding. They know everyone starts clumsy, everyone snaps a twig or two, everyone forgets, at least once, that silence is something you build, step by step, breath by breath. And as darkness deepens, they finally gesture toward a barely visible clearing ahead, the place where tonight's quietest campsite will begin to take shape. But that, of course, belongs to the next section's promised journey.
You step into the clearing, expecting a breather, maybe even a chance to flop backward into the snow like a cartoon character. But the traders are already scanning the terrain with that predatory calm they've perfected over years. To you, it looks like an ordinary patch of forest floor glazed with fresh powder. To them, it's a blueprint waiting to be drafted. The Métis guide lifts a gloved hand and taps the air once. That means you stand still, shut up, and let the winter physics lesson begin. The first thing they assess is the drift pattern, how the wind has coaxed the snow into soft waves, some piled high like meringue, others swept thin until the earth shows through. You don't see it at first, but then the guide traces a finger along the edge of one drift, letting loose a small avalanche of powder so light you could almost confuse it for breath. "Too shallow," he whispers, "makes noise when you walk." You step closer and hear it, the squeaky, rubbery complaint of thin snow layered over frozen ground, like stepping on a cold sponge someone forgot to wring out. Instead, they head to a deeper drift, one that's been sculpted by weeks of wind curling around the trees. When the guide steps into it, the sound is nearly non-existent, a slow woof like someone folding a blanket. He motions for you to try. This time, the snow receives your weight with gratitude instead of protest. It feels like stepping into warm flour, if flour could freeze your ankles solid. The traders exchange a glance. They've chosen the right canvas. Now it's time for the engineering. With long, sweeping strides, they begin packing down a perimeter trail that loops around the clearing. Watching them stomp in synchronized silence is surprisingly mesmerizing, like watching someone carefully erase lines from a chalkboard. Each step compresses a few inches of powder into a dense, springy layer. You join in, and after a few minutes, you get the hang of it. Heel down first, press slowly, lift evenly. It becomes a little meditative, in the way repetitive work sometimes calms you more than doing nothing at all. A nice bonus is that you feel slightly useful, instead of just being the designated twig snapper. As you work, one of the traders murmurs a mainstream historical fact. Many winter expeditions established snow blankets, compacted layers around a campsite, not only to reduce noise, but also to help insulate and support gear, sleds, and fires. Without them, the camp would shift and groan all night like an unhappy stomach. You glance down at the growing ring of smooth, compacted snow and find it strangely beautiful, like a giant moon halo nesting on the forest floor. Then comes the quirky part, literally quirky. The second trader crouches by a drift and begins carving out shapes with his mittens. At first you assume he's just fidgeting, or maybe bored, but then he explains, sotto voce, that these dips and patterns help manipulate how sound travels above the snow. By creating uneven surfaces, the cold air breaks into microcurrents that scatter and dampen noise. It's a sort of acoustic engineering you didn't even know early traders bothered with. Some carved shallow bowls, others made little ridges, and occasionally, when spirits were high, someone shaped a crude snow animal for luck. The guide mentions he once saw a guy sculpt a snow beaver so detailed it could have passed for a museum mascot. That memory gets a faint grin from him, which is basically a belly laugh by trader standards. You try making a ridge yourself, but yours collapses like a poorly planned soufflé. The guide gives you a patient look and says, "Start smaller." You do. Eventually, you manage to shape one respectable groove in the drift before your mitten freezes into a crunchy claw. Small victories. The sun dips behind a bank of fir trees, and the temperature drops fast, sharpening every inhale. Your breath fogs thick enough to draw a small smiley face in it, accidentally fulfilling tonight's first joke quota in this section. One trader snorts quietly and mutters, "City people." You refuse to be offended. It's too cold. Now comes the real magic, the snow bed. Traders need a place to sleep that won't squeak or shift, so they start flattening a large rectangle in the drift. They stomp, slide, and press with the precision of people who know exactly how many pounds of pressure turn powder into pillowy silence. You join them, feeling each step transform chaos into order. When it's compact enough, they sprinkle a thin layer of loose powder over the top, like a dusting of sugar, to muffle micro sounds from clothing, shifting, or turning over in the night. You step onto the finished snowbed, half expecting to plunge straight through like a bad cartoon. Instead, it supports you with surprising firmness. The guide nods once. Good. Won't betray us if someone rolls over. You make a mental note to roll over with stealth tonight, which feels like the most absurd thing you've ever promised yourself. As they work, they talk in murmurs about cold, about fox tracks, about how silence changes depending on the moon phase. There's an open scholarly debate they mention too. Some experts still argue whether early traders borrowed these techniques directly from Inuit snowhouse construction methods or developed them independently in response to the environment. The traders themselves don't seem to care, which makes sense. People living through harsh winters never argue about credit, only survival. Once the snowbed is finished, they start shaping what they call sound gutters. These are shallow trenches carved around the perimeter to catch and soften the crunch of accidental footsteps. Step in the gutter, and your boot is hugged by powder instead of slapping hard-packed snow. It's like having emergency pillows for your feet. You test one out, and it feels so well it's like someone turned down the volume knob on reality. You whisper, "That's wild," and the god replies, "That's winter." Fair enough. The next phase is cold compression. One trader produces a wooden paddle from his pack, essentially a flat board tied to a handle, and begins gently tapping the snowbed. It's like he's waking a sleeping creature. Each tap tightens the snow without cracking it, turning the whole structure into a silent platform. You try a few taps yourself, enjoying the way the paddle vibrates softly in your hand. It's oddly soothing, like knocking on a giant marshmallow. During a break, the guide shares another tidbit. Some winter groups even used animal hides under their sleeping areas to prevent the snow from squeaking if their body heat caused thawing. The hides absorbed moisture and dampened noise, making nighttime movements nearly undetectable. He says, people forget that silence isn't just avoidance, it's engineering. As the evening deepens, the clearing starts to resemble a carefully maintained outdoor studio. Smooth floor, sculpted walls, intentional textures. You realize that the traders are crafting not just a campsite, but an acoustic bubble, a little sanctuary in the wilderness where even a misplaced breath won't echo far. You catch yourself smiling. There's something deeply satisfying in participating in a tradition that mixes practical skill with unexpected artistry. Winter survival looks brutish from a distance, but up close, it's delicate, thoughtful, almost elegant. While the guide smooths one final ridge, he gestures for you to stop and listen. You strain your ears, expecting maybe the faint howl of wind, the shuffle of an animal, the crackle of branches. But what you hear is nothing. Not the oppressive kind of nothing, but a warm, velvet nothing. A silence so rich and soft that it feels like it's pressing gently against your ears. That, he says quietly, is the sound of a place that won't betray you. You nod, trying to look wise, but inside you're thinking, wow, so snow has a stealth mode? That's joke number 2, internally delivered, though your grin gives it away. The traders step back to inspect their work. Everything gleams faintly in the moonlight. The packed trail, the snowbed, the gutters, the drift patterns. It looks like a minimalist sculpture created by someone obsessed with soundproofing. The guide hands you a bit of loose powder. Your turn, he says. Finish the bed. You drop the powder and smooth it out, taking your time, letting the rhythm lull you. You're surprised at how natural it feels now, as if your hands already know what winter wants. Finally, one trader gives a satisfied grunt. Good. Now it will hold quiet no matter what the night brings. You can't help imagining what that might mean. Wolves sniffing at the edges of camp, rival traders creeping near, or maybe just the wind deciding to tell secrets to the trees. Whatever the night brings, the camp is ready to swallow every sound you don't want the world to hear. You take one last look at the finished engineering marvel, a sleeping platform made entirely of snow, shaped to dampen noise, framed by sculpted drifts and cushioned gutters. It's the quietest bed you'll ever lie on, and possibly the coldest. You already know you're gonna wake up stiff, numb, and definitely questioning your life choices. But for now, wrapped in the serene hush of your handcrafted snow stage, you feel strangely at peace. The traders move towards the center, ready to set up the fire area next, the whisper fire techniques you were promised. But that journey waits for the next section, tucked just beyond the silent glow of your snow masterpiece.
You follow the traders toward the center of the clearing, where the night has settled into a soft, blue-tinged hush. The snowbed behind you looks like an immaculate stage waiting for actors who refuse to make any noise at all. And now you're being ushered to the next trick of early Canadian survival, the whisper fire. You'd think a fire, by definition, would crackle, hiss, pop, sputter, and otherwise behave like a caffeinated toddler. But the traders have different plans. Tonight, you're about to learn how they coax flames into behaving like polite house guests. The first step involves choosing the right wood, something you thought you already understood. Build fire, stay warm, don't die of frostbite. Easy. But no.
Firewood, in this world, is judged the way people judge microphones, by clarity, resonance, and whether it sounds like it's going to squeal at the worst possible moment. The guide kneels beside a stack of fallen branches, half buried in the drift. He holds one to his ear, taps it with a knuckle, and listens. You try the same, and hear wood, just wood. But he nods sagely and sets it aside. Dry, he whispers, quiet burner. The other trader sorts through birch, poplar, and a few pieces of windfall and spruce. You learn your mainstream historical fact of this section. Many fur traders relied on birch bark not only as a fire starter, but as a near-silent ignition source. Unlike resin-heavy pine, which pops aggressively when moisture hits heat, birch burns evenly, cleanly, and, most importantly, quietly. Bark curls into a delicate flame without shouting about it. You pick up a spruce branch, and the guide shakes his head. Spruce argues with you, he says, talks too loud. He taps it, and the branch responds with a brittle crack that carries farther than you expect. In the nighttime stillness, it sounds like someone stomped on a glow stick of pure noise. Lesson learned. As the traders gather the correct materials, you help by dragging over a few armfuls of birch bark. It's papery, flexible, and smells faintly sweet like winter tea leaves. One trader takes a handful and carefully scrapes off thin ribbons with his knife, letting them flutter into a pile that looks like wood-colored confetti. This, he murmurs, is the heart of a whisper fire. You're about to kneel beside him when your boot slips into a hollow patch of snow, and you faceplant with a noise that could generously be described as ungainly. The sound echoes off the trees with a theatrical thwump, and you're positive someone in the next province just heard it. Joke number one practically writes itself as one trader murmurs, subtle, the forest barely noticed. He helps you up, dusts some snow off your shoulders, and adds, maybe the fire will drown out the sound of your dignity collapsing. You nod, accepting your fate. Once you're upright, the traders begin arranging the fire pit. Instead of digging a deep hole, they make a shallow, saucer-shaped depression in the snow, then line it with strips of bark to create a moisture barrier. You watch as they work with slow, deliberate motions. Every scrape, every press, every adjustment seems to have a rhythm, as if silence itself is the metronome. Then they do something unexpected. One trader produces a small pouch of fine sand and sprinkles a thin ring around the fire area. You raise an eyebrow. He explains that the sand absorbs errant sparks before they can snap against ice crystals or skitter across frozen ground. It's a trick traders learned from coastal communities, and according to him, some swore by it as a spark swallower. That's your quirky tidbit for this section, an entire ritual built around taming fire's unpredictable voice. Meanwhile, the guide arranges the birch bark curls into a delicate nest, then places a few slivers of bone-dry kindling on top. He holds each piece with the tenderness of someone handling small animals. You almost expect him to whisper an apology to every stick. Once the nest is ready, he holds out a flint and a small metal striker, giving you the honor of lighting the whisper fire. You strike once, too hard, and sparks fly upward with a noise that sounds suspiciously celebratory. The trader winces. Gently, he says, we're seducing fire, not summoning it. You try again, slower. And this time the spark drifts down like a sleepy moth and lands on the birch curls. They take flame instantly, glowing amber without a single crackle. The fire grows with uncanny softness. No sharp pops, no hissing. It climbs like a whisper spreading across parchment. It's the quietest fire you've ever seen, half mesmerizing and half unsettling, like watching a candle flame that's decided to grow up and get a job. Now that the flame is established, the traders begin a ritual you've never witnessed, the quiet feed. Instead of throwing in logs, they ease them in sideways, pressing one end into the coals and lowering the rest gradually,
allowing the wood to warm before the flame reaches it. This prevents sudden temperature shock, what causes those flashy popcorn-style pops that could betray a camp's location. It's deliberate, controlled, and weirdly graceful. You feel like you're watching dancers in a minimalist winter ballet. One trader explains in a whisper that early winter groups developed this technique during tense periods with rival companies, when the sound of a popping log could reveal a camp hundreds of meters away. The Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company weren't exactly shy about their rivalries, and quiet encampments were essential for staying unnoticed. You know, just the usual workplace competition mixed with freezing temperatures and combustible fuel. You lean closer to the flame, soaking in the warmth. It's not roaring, it's breathing. A gentle exhale of heat touches your face. This is a fire made for being hidden, not admired. The traders begin cooking, if you can call it that. They set a small tin pot on the coals and add snow, waiting for it to melt into water. You hear nothing, no sizzling, no spitting. The pot sits in perfect stillness, absorbing just enough heat to warm without boiling loudly. When the snow finally collapses into liquid, the sound is as soft as a sigh. It's the ninja of hydration. One trader takes out a strip of dried meat, jerky but ancient, and warms it near the flame. He tells you that some groups used to pre-dry their meat twice to ensure no pockets of moisture remained that might sizzle loudly when heated. Double-dried delicacy, he jokes, tastes like seasoned wood, but quiet wood. That's joke number 2 for this section. You try a piece. It does, in fact, taste like a prolonged argument between salt and bark, but you're grateful for anything warm. As the meal warms, the traders shift into maintenance mode. One gently brushes away excess ash that might crumble loudly. Another adjusts the windbreak, made from carefully stacked snow and bark, to keep drafts from rattling the flames. Every motion is tuned to silence, as if the entire camp is performing ASMR for the winter gods. With the fire stable, the guide leans back and shares a long-standing debate among historians. Some claim whisper fires were intentionally developed as stealth tactics, while others argue these methods naturally emerged from trial and error in brutally silent terrain. The trader's response? History argues, winter doesn't. That settles it. As you sip your tiny portion of warm, nearly silent broth, you notice something deeply satisfying. The fire, the snowbed, the sky, and the cold all blend into one seamless sensory hum. Nothing stands out, nothing interrupts. The whole campsite feels like a single extended exhale. But of course, nature likes to test confidence. A sudden breeze lifts a shower of icy crystals off the branches above, sprinkling them over the fire pit. You jump. The fire barely flickers. The traders glance upward but don't react otherwise. That's the loudest the night will get, unless you fall again. Joke number 3. Well deserved. As the traders clean up the cooking area, you ask a question. What happens if someone snores? The guide smiles slightly. They sleep on the far edge of camp. Then he adds, we'll put you somewhere the wind can carry the sound away. Joke number 4. Your reputation is thriving. The fire dims to a low, steady glow, burning with a warmth that feels almost conspiratorial. You feel the fatigue settle into your bones, soft, calming, a weight you welcome. The traders begin banking the fire for the night, covering parts of it with snow to soften the oxygen flow. Even the coals breathe quietly now, like a sleeping animal. As you prepare to move to the snow bed, the guide hands you a tiny birch curl. For your pocket, he says, in case you ever need a quiet flame somewhere else. It's strangely sentimental, coming from a man who speaks in whispers and communicates mostly through eyebrow movements. You tuck it away, feeling like you've acquired a new piece of secret wilderness lore. Something that doesn't belong in a modern world filled with buzzing heaters and clicking thermostats. The whisper fire glows just enough to light your path back to the snowbed, where the next phase of the night, noise-proof shelter.
And so you find yourself easing deeper into the fifth and final stretch of the journey, as the carriage now rattles with a softer, more languid rhythm, as if even the wheels have surrendered to the hush that settles after a long Victorian afternoon spent in genteel company. You are no longer thinking about the positions of forks in wicker hampers or the choreography of parasols along the grassy verges. Instead, your mind loops back to the quiet satisfaction you felt earlier when the railway steward nodded approvingly at the tidy stack of folded napkins you left behind. These things matter, at least in the world you now inhabit, where every tiny gesture becomes both a signal and a story, a subtle way of telling fellow passengers who you are before you ever speak a word aloud. The scent of cooled tea leaves still clings to your gloves, a faint bergamot reminder of how carefully you handled the delicate porcelain on the picnic lawn. The cup now rests safely in its padded case at your side, but the weight of it feels symbolic, an object that measures your steady progress from hesitant visitor to assured participant in this peculiar railway picnic society. You hear the muted hum of conversation from the next compartment, a pair of matronly women reviewing the afternoon with all the earnest importance of diplomats. They confess in whispers that the sandwiches were cut slightly thicker than expected. It becomes a matter of tremendous significance. You almost smile, because earlier in the day you would have found such commentary absurd. Now, after weathering the choreography yourself, it feels like a shared language you can suddenly understand. The countryside outside the window dims into a suede gray, fields dissolving into silhouettes as dusk collects in the corners of the compartment. You tuck one loose thread of your blanket under your knee and remember the soft grass beneath your shoes when you first stepped off the train. That hush, the collective intake of breath as passengers transformed into picnickers, still hovers in your memory. You were part of it, part of the synchronized unfurling of rugs, the precise removal of hatpins, the measured lowering of baskets in a way that made even simple motions seem rehearsed, almost ceremonial. That choreography remains within you now, unwinding like the gentle pulse of the train tracks beneath your feet. A porter wanders by, his boots echoing down the corridor. He slides open the compartment door to check on your comfort, and you nod with practiced poise. You find your responses have shifted across the day, each one subtly adjusting to the social temperature around you, softer than usual, a touch more melodic, threaded with a gentleness that Victorian travel seems to coax out of you. There is pride in that, quiet but firm. You have mastered not only the outward rules, but also the inward rhythm of these railway picnics, where calmness is both a courtesy and a craft. The train curves, the lamps overhead flicker once, and you realize how naturally you've come to anticipate these mechanical quirks. Even the rocking feels familiar now, a metronome guiding your thoughts into a final, contemplative glide. You review the day as though turning pages in a book, the symbolic unpacking of the hamper, the almost theatrical etiquette of seat sharing, the way the breeze lifted your napkin at precisely the wrong moment, and the way you recovered with a gentle, controlled gesture that earned you a nod from a nearby gentleman who had clearly been watching for such lapses. You imagine returning to such gatherings again, perhaps at the height of summer, when strawberries appear in the hamper, perhaps in early autumn, when the air tastes faintly of chimney smoke. The rituals will shift slightly with the seasons, but the essence will remain. An invitation to slow down, to treat each gesture as if the world is watching not with judgment, but with admiration for your dedication to harmony and grace. The lamps brighten as the train nears the station, their glow softening the edges of the compartment into a warm amber haze. You gather your things carefully, noting how naturally your hands now perform the motions: fold, fasten, smooth, lift. You step toward the corridor with the serene certainty of someone who has not merely attended a Victorian railway picnic, but absorbed its unspoken rules into your very posture. Even as the train breaks with a gentle sigh, you remain poised, steady, attuned to that cultivated calm the era cherishes so deeply. And when the doors finally open and the cool evening air spills in, you step onto the platform with the same quiet confidence that guided your every movement throughout the day. An unhurried grace that lingers long after the picnic ends, long after the train has emptied, long after the Victorian twilight folds itself neatly into night.
And still the calm of the picnic remains with you as you move along the platform, not fading, but settling, like a shawl draped across your shoulders, woven from the soft etiquette of an era that believed serenity itself was a kind of social contribution. You walk slowly, not because anyone demands it, but because your steps have taken on that Victorian gentleness, deliberate without being stiff, graceful without seeming self-aware. The clatter of the departing carriage behind you feels strangely distant, as though it belongs to a different world, one you merely borrowed for an afternoon. You notice other passengers dispersing into the evening, ladies adjusting their hats as if ensuring the final note of the day remains elegant. Gentlemen offering elbows with the quiet assurance of those accustomed to ritualized courtesy. Their movements mirror the ones you observed and imitated earlier, reinforcing how seamlessly you now fit among them. You sense the subtle glances exchanged, small approving acknowledgments that you have completed the day's social dance with all the quiet competence expected of a railway picnicker. The station lamps glow like pearls suspended in the dusk, illuminating the fine dust settling on your gloves. You brush it off lightly, recalling how Victorian travelers are expected to maintain not just their composure, but also the pristine state of their attire, an outward assurance that one handles the sojourns of travel without haste or frazzle. And indeed, you do. The day's rituals have shaped your manner so thoroughly that even the way you adjust the clasp of your handbag feels steeped in a slow, dignified rhythm. You pass a family lingering beside a luggage trolley, children nodding off against their mother's skirts, while the father arranges parcels with a careful precision that mirrors your own recent tidy stacking of picnic linens. You recognize the same sense of duty, the same calm efficiency, the same desire to send the day off properly, as if it were not merely lived, but curated. Perhaps that is the secret of Victorian leisure, its devotion to quiet perfection, to the idea that even rest requires a gentle architecture. A light breeze glides across the platform, carrying with it the faint sense of coal smoke, distant lilac water from someone's perfume, and the last hints of the meadow where your picnic unfolded. You breathe it in and feel the landscape still within you, its grass cool underfoot, its quiet murmur of genteel conversation, its measured laughter rising like the notes of a string quartet. You realize with a certain affectionate amusement that you may never look at a simple basket or a folded cloth in quite the same way again. The memory of the day has left an imprint on your gestures, your posture, even the cadence of your breath. You descend the station steps slowly, aware of how the evening has settled into a serene symphony of soft sounds. The rumble of a departing carriage down the track, the crisp click of a lady's boot heel, the sigh of steam escaping from a recently arrived engine.
Everything feels both hushed and alive, as though you were still inside the gentle choreography of the railway picnic, just at its final movement, when everyone rises, folds their programs, and exits the hall with quiet grace. A handsome cab waits at the street's edge, its driver lifting his hat as you approach. You offer a nod that is not merely polite, but learned, a gesture shaped by the day's lessons, by the subtle codes of Victorian public decorum. As you settle inside, the soft leather creaking beneath you, you find yourself performing one last practiced motion, smoothing your lap, tightening your gloves, resting your hands lightly atop one another. The cab pulls forward, hooves tapping a gentle rhythm along the lamplit road. As the station recedes behind you, you feel the transformation completing itself. Not dramatic, not sudden, but like a slow bloom of understanding. The rituals of the picnic, the cadence of travel, the quiet discipline of shared leisure, they've folded themselves into your awareness so seamlessly that even the city's evening bustle feels more ordered, more composed, as though attuned to your newly acquired calm. And you glide onward, deeper into the soft Victorian night, carrying with you the serenity of railway lawns, the memory of porcelain and parasols, and the enduring knowledge that gentleness, well practiced, intentional, and quietly elegant, can accompany you long after the picnic ends.